am Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch. President Trump has contacted Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and has asked her for permission to use military force, U.S. military force, in Mexico against the drug cartels. And to her everlasting credit, Sheinbaum has said, no, we're a sovereign, independent country. You're not going to be sending your troops or your bombs into our country to fight the drug cartels in this country. You stick to your country, we'll stick to our country. So the question, of course, is what is President Trump going to do now? It's entirely possible that he may simply ignore her rejection of his intention or his hope of using military force in Mexico against these drug cartels. And the justification that he would rely on to do this is the war on terrorism. Now, you may say, well, wait a minute, Jacob. What does the war on terrorism have to do with the war on drugs? Well, the war on drugs is a criminal matter, criminal justice matter. I mean, we have prosecutions of drug dealers and possessors of drugs and distributor of drugs and drug violence and so forth. You know, they're indicted in state court or federal court, and they go through the regular criminal justice process. The war on terrorism works that same way to a certain extent. Terrorism is a federal criminal offense. It's in the U.S. Code. Terrorism cases are prosecuted in federal courts in Virginia and New York, elsewhere. So in that sense, the system works the same way as the drug offenses. But after the 9/11 attacks, everything changed. The Pentagon and the CIA said, look, we now have the authority to consider terrorism as an act of war, because these 9/11 attacks are not a crime, they said, that they're an act of war. And so now the president and then the Pentagon, the NSA, the CIA can treat terrorism as an act of war. And because the terrorists, or the accused terrorists, aren't wearing uniforms, well, they're illegal enemy combatants. And so you can treat them as an illegal enemy combatant, execute them if you take them prisoners. They're not wearing uniforms. They're like spies, or assassinations, torture, indefinite detention. You see, they're illegal enemy combatants. They're not criminal defendants. And that was what Guantanamo Bay was all about. So you end up having these two different systems, and we warned about this here at FFF after the 9/11 attacks. We said, okay, they're going to seize on this as an opportunity to really destroy the rights and liberties of the American people. And it's not like we were, Nostradamus or anything. It's just that crises have always been the time-honored way by which regimes, rulers, destroy the rights and freedoms of the people, because people get afraid. And those of you that were alive after the 9/11 attacks can recall that there was a lot of fear. People were scared to death. Oh, Jacob, the terrorists are coming. The terrorists are coming. I mean, it was almost like the whole Cold War fear. The communists are coming. The communists are coming. Oh, Jacob, they're in Cuba. Oh, my gosh, Jacob, they're in Chile. Oh, my gosh, Jacob, they're in Central America. They're coming to get us. The Reds are coming to get us. Well, that was the fear after the 9/11 attacks. The terrorists were coming to get us. And so rulers always seize on that fear that comes with a crisis to start wielding and exercising omnipotent powers. And that's what happened after 9/11. They saw that as an opportunity. And there were fundamental changes in America's system. A lot of Americans don't realize that or don't want to acknowledge it. They want to act like, oh, everything's still the same as it always was since the founding of the United States. But it really isn't, because the government now wields omnipotent powers over the American people, including the power of assassinating Americans. I mean, like, did you ever think when you were a kid that you would live under a system where the government has the power to assassinate its own citizens? I mean, I didn't. I thought that was like what communist regimes did, totalitarian regimes. But no, we all live under that kind of system now, where they can label anybody a terrorist and bam, kill them. And they've killed American citizens. And people think, oh, it couldn't happen on American soil. Well, of course it could happen on American soil. It's a global war on terrorism. Terrorists are everywhere. I mean, that's what makes this war perpetual, ongoing. It'll never end. because the terrorists are everywhere, including right here in the United States. But now in Mexico, because you see what President Trump has done is he's morphed together the war on terrorism and the war on drugs. So by labeling these cartels terrorist organizations in Mexico, that removes it from the area of criminal justice, extradition, indictment, conviction, incarceration. Now it's a wartime situation. And since the U.S. government's the sole remaining empire, we all know that after the fall of the Soviet Union, we're the only empire left, and we have the responsibility of policing the world and getting rid of all the terrorists in the world. The U.S. government has the authority to go right on into Mexico, start bombing, start firing missiles, send in troops. It's war on terrorism. Okay, it's very ingenious. Now, Mexico's pretty sensitive to this type of thing because they remember, even if Americans don't, that they lost half their country in a war that was provoked and concocted by a U.S. president. This was the Mexican War that the U.S. had offered Mexico $30 million to buy the entire northern half of the country, just to buy the country. And Mexico said, well, no, this is our country. It's not for sale. And so what President Polk did is he just provoked a war to get this northern half of the country. Because he knew that the U.S. was much more powerful than Mexico, especially the armed forces. It would be a fairly easy thing to do to defeat Mexico in a war. So he sends troops down to this disputed area in near Brownsville, Texas, and provokes a war, naturally, because Mexico was saying this is our land, this is our country, and Polk knew that. So they attacked the force that he sent down there, and now he says, we've been attacked, I need a declaration of war. And this was when presidents were still following the constitutional requirement requiring a congressional declaration of war. And so the war starts, and the U.S. easily defeats Mexico. And as part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the U.S. acquires the entire northern half of Mexico. I mean, this included California, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Nevada, Colorado. Texas was kind of a special case because they had declared their independence prior to this whole saga. But so the U.S. ended up paying them $15 million in the treaty. Like, they lowered it by half because Mexico had forced them to go through the hassle of a war to acquire what they had wanted. So as you can imagine, Mexico's pretty sensitive to, U.S. imperialism, U.S. expansion. And so it's got to enter their minds that if there is a war, and that clearly that's an act of war. If Trump starts dropping bombs inside Mexico, that is an act of war. I don't care whether it's the worst drug dealer in history. That's Mexican territory. That's their sovereign, their country. You drop a bomb there, that is an act of war against Mexico. But can Mexico, afford to declare war against the United States and say we are now in a state of war, which they clearly will be? I don't think so, because they're going to be thinking that Trump's going to use this war as a way to steal another northern half of Mexico. I mean, the land south of the Rio Grande, down a couple hundred miles or so, or take over the whole country. That way, that would solve clearly the illegal immigration problem, at least from Mexico, because everybody would be American citizens down there. Now, that might upset some of the Trumpsters that would see incorporating all these Mexican citizens as Americans is polluting our culture, our values, or something like that. But that's essentially what happened when we stole, that's really the best word for it, stole the northern half of the country with the Mexican War and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. All the Mexican citizens that were living here, they had the option of going back to Mexico, but most of them stayed here, and they were made American citizens overnight. So what had been a foreign country overnight became the United States, became part of the United States. And this is what a lot of Americans don't realize, or they forget that, that all this culture that we have, it fundamentally altered the culture of the United States naturally. You sort of all of a sudden incorporate the northern half of a country that speaks Spanish, that's been in this part of Mexico and Spain and for centuries, and all of a sudden, oh, you're part of the United States. I mean, most of the people couldn't speak English for decades. In fact, many people in my hometown of Laredo still can't speak English, a large percentage. So they're pretty sensitive about it. I doubt if Trump would do that, but they're sensitive about it. But clearly it's an act of war. And there would be repercussions. Some people are advocating the Sheinbaum to stop cooperating with Trump's war on drugs and his war on immigrants. She, at his request, sent I think 10,000 Mexican troops to the border to enforce, the American war on drugs and the American system of immigration controls. When you need a foreign country to enforce your systems, that's a pretty good sign that it's a bad system. And then she sent, I think, 29 drug dealers up to Trump, sort of like tribute, paying him tribute, so that he wouldn't put the terrorists onto Mexico. But if Trump starts bombing, I mean, she'd be under tremendous public pressure to respond, and I think the best way she could respond is the way she should respond anyway, even without the bombs dropping. We're not going to help you with your war on drugs anymore and your war on immigrants. And that's what she should do. The best thing she ought to do, and the Mexican government do, is legalize drugs. Forget what the U.S. does. Just legalize drugs. That would get rid of the drug cartels overnight, all the violence that has destroyed Mexico. Stop catering to the United States and their wish to have this drug war. It's a big money maker for U.S. officials, federal judges, and federal prosecutors who make their careers with drug cases. And then stop enforcing the war on immigrants. That's America's problem. And stop putting troops at the border to help them out. And that'd be the two best things she could ever do, regardless of whether Trump invades or not. All right, let's move to one thing, though, that is clearly worth pointing out is Trump is fiercely committed to enforcing the war on drugs. I mean, okay, here's a war that's been going on for decades, all my life, really. And there he is still, we're going to win it. We're going to win it. I mean, this is just ludicrous. And the federal judges and the federal prosecutors are saying the same thing that was said back in the 60s and 70s. I know this. I practiced law down on the border. I handled drug cases from the criminal defendant standpoint, in federal court and state courts. I mean, it's just a great big racket. But boy, all the federal judges down there at that time, we're going to win the war on drugs. We're going to give out maximum sentences. Not all of them, but a lot of them were. One of them was called Maximum John because he always gave a maximum jail sentence. Well, the same thing today. There's a whole new crop of lawyers that were kids back in the 60s and 70s. They mindlessly repeating the same stuff. We're going to win the war on drugs. We're going to give out maximum sentences. And it's just weird. It's really weird that how they make no mistake about it. I wouldn't be surprised 30 years from now where the kids today they're lawyers and judges. We're going to win the war on drugs. We're going to win the war on drugs. It's just so it's befuddling. At least Americans were smart enough to abandon prohibition of alcohol when they realized what a racket it was. Deadly and destructive racket, but the war on drugs goes on forever. And of course, nobody asks the fundamental question is, everything's dedicated to stopping Americans, a large number of Americans, I don't know, millions of Americans, it's got to be a big number for them to be waging this war on drugs, from getting their hands on drugs and putting them in their mouths. You see, that's what this whole thing's about. Stopping Americans who want to ingest drugs. But nobody asks the question, if this is such a great society, why is everybody taking drugs? Why are people tripping out with these mind-altering substances? You see, that's a pretty good sign that something's wrong with this society. And not to mention the fact of ever-increasing suicide rates among young people. I mean, that to me is your best sign that something's really bad. Because why would a young person want to check out early out of life? I mean, this you have the whole rest of your life to look forward to when you're young, and you think, man, everything's bright ahead of you. You haven't been battered down in your 40s and 50s and 30s to a certain extent, by all the bad things that can happen in life. But no, they're checking out early. And that's a pretty good sign that something's wrong with your society. And there is. I mean, there's a lot wrong. And it's these systems that I've long argued that Americans in the 20th century adopted, including the drug war system, that Americans adopted and that 21st century Americans have continued. Well, let's move on to immigration. A lot of interesting things happen in immigration. There's a federal judge in Brownsville, much to his credit. His name is Fernando Rodriguez Jr., appointed by Trump, ironically enough, who has declared in a judicial decree, judgment, that this whole notion that, we're being invaded by the Venezuelan gang or the illegal immigrants is totally ludicrous. He's just thrown it out. So now you have an official federal court judgment saying that this invasion nonsense is pure nonsense. And as y'all know, I've been saying this. I mean, it's self-evident. It's one of those self-evident truths that it's not an invasion. An invasion is what the U.S. government did to Iraq and to the Iraqi people. Bombs and missiles and death and destruction and destroying homes and businesses and infrastructure and torturing people and executing people and Abu Ghraibing people. And I mean, all that's an invasion. Immigrants coming over here to better their lives. Okay, they're breaking the illegal entry law, yes, granted. But they're coming holding babies and not AR-15s, or M16s. They're not coming in here to wreak death and destruction like the U.S. government did in Iraq. So it's not an invasion. In fact, but Trump and the Trumpsters keep calling it invasion, to justify what they're doing in this war on immigrants and war, especially the war on illegal immigration. And so and some of them have been convinced, we're getting invaded, Jacob, we're getting invaded. And so, it brings to mind that guy from Dallas that traveled to El Paso and started shooting people in Walmart, Hispanics in Walmart, Mexican Americans as well as Mexicans, because in his mind, we were being invaded and he was doing his patriotic duty to save America by protecting us from these invaders, by killing the invaders, which is not an illogical mindset. I'm sure that everybody said, the guy's nuts. Well, why? Why is he nuts if he buys into this invasion thing? If people who are saying that this is an invasion are not nuts, why is he nuts? All he did was act on it. He was going there and shooting invaders. He's following the logic of the argument. And he hasn't been pardoned. I don't know if there's any plans of pardoning him, but that's what he did. He was protecting America. In his mind, he was a patriot. Okay, but from my mindset, I think the mindset of a lot of people, no, he's a murderer because this isn't an invasion. It's ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. But the idea of the invasion is, now we can exercise wartime powers and so forth. So much to Judge Rodriguez's credit, he says, nonsense. This is not an invasion. So he's knocked out that whole 1798 law that President Trump was relying on to justify, that this was an invasion, the wartime powers and so forth. Now, I want to stick with this immigration theme because just as I said that when you've got a society in which large numbers of young people are committing suicide, and veterans too, the ever-increasing rates of suicide among veterans, that's a sign that something's wrong with the society. And to a certain extent, all the millions of people on drugs that want to get their hands on drugs so they can ingest their drugs, that's a sign too that this is not a healthy society, that there's something fundamentally wrong. And of course, the government's response and Trump's response is, we'll just go after him. We'll punish the people trying to furnish him the drugs. We'll interdict them. We'll put troops at the border. We'll do everything to keep them get their hands on that fentanyl or that marijuana or that cocaine. And we'll just maybe surround it, America, so to keep them from getting their hands on the drugs. But no, I think the more fundamental question is why? Why are they trying to get their hands on drugs? Because I think this is a very dysfunctional society based on the systems we have. And so I think it's also that principle applies in the area of immigration, that when you see ordinary law-abiding people getting arrested and busted for offenses, criminal offenses, That's a pretty good sign in my books that something's wrong in that society with the system. Because you ordinarily think that your criminal justice system is going to be arresting murderers and rapists and thieves and burglars and robbers and frauds. And I mean, this is what you want your government to do, is to target those kind of people. But when all of a sudden the government is targeting regular, ordinary, day-to-day people, or the law-abiding people, or ordinarily law-abiding in terms of murder, rape, and theft, that to me is a good sign that something is fundamentally wrong. All right, so what happened is that the feds have arrested and are going to prosecute a state judge that on this immigration issue, that apparently there was an illegal immigrant that was appearing before her court, and the feds were waiting outside to arrest him, and she let him out. She let the guy out the back door the jurors take. And so they've arrested her with obstruction of justice. Well, regardless of how it comes out, the fact is this is a state judge. She's been a state judge for many, many years from what I recall. Very reputable, very credible. Now she's under arrest and indictment in the federal court system. That to me is a sign something's not right with the system, and they're gloating. I mean, the feds are just, and they're saying any state judge, boy, you better be aware that we'll come after you if you do anything to help illegal immigrants. You see, and I don't know what was going through the mind of the state judge when she did that, but one possibility is that if you've got federal officials waiting outside a state courtroom, ready to arrest illegal immigrants, your whole state system's going to break down, because the state criminal defendants that are accused of crimes that are here illegally, they're not going to show up anymore. Why would they show up if they know they're going to be arrested and deported? And so you're by doing this, you're interfering with the administration of justice. They've accused her of obstructing justice, but they're waiting outside. They're obstructing the orderly process of state courts. Because when people stop showing up for arraignments and hearings and trials and so forth, that creates a lot of chaos in the state system. All right, so that's not the only instance, though. Some years ago, I think it was 2019, an attorney, a state's attorney, she worked for the city or the county or both, was arrested and charged with taking care of or harboring illegal immigrants. What she had done was she was driving down the highway, I think it was at night, and there were some illegal immigrants on the side of the road, and one of them, I think there was three of them, and the girl, there was two guys and a girl. The girl looked really, really sick. I mean, like she might die. They apparently had just crossed the desert. I think this was in Arizona or New Mexico. And they were in bad shape. So this lady pulls over, as any normal human being would do, and lets them sit in her car. And she's trying to figure out what to do. I mean, she's a lawyer. She knows what happens. It could happen if she starts driving and take this girl to the hospital. And right there's a sign that something's wrong with the system, where you have to sit there and say, should I take this person to the hospital or not? And but it's rational, because while these people are sitting in their car, a border patrol comes up and says, oh, you're harboring illegal immigrants. And they arrest her, and they charge her with transporting, no, not transporting, because I don't think she ever transported them, but harboring, like taking care of them, by letting them sit in the car. And so I don't think they ever pressed it and went to trial. And that was more than 5 years ago. The statute of limitations on harboring is 5 years. But for 5 years, I guarantee you, this woman, this lawyer for the city and the county, she had to watch her steps real carefully, because for 5 years they had this hanging over her head. At any time, the feds could have said, we're indicting you for harboring. And so it's a nice way to suppress speech, to make sure everybody stays in line, or at least her. And everybody along the border that's faced with this same problem. This is not an unusual problem. I lived on the border for 30 years. I mean, this is a kind of a regular type thing down there. And she had to live with that cloud of a possible indictment for 5 years until the statute of limitations ran out. But when you see a regular lawyer who's working for the state, a state's attorney getting arrested and charged with this immigration system, something's not right. That's a sign that something's not right, along with the judge. Now, there's another case that happened back in 2005, and there's a lot of instances along these lines, but this was a lady and a man who stopped and helped illegal immigrants who needed help, and they charged them with either transporting or harboring illegal immigrants. The charges were apparently dismissed, though. Not apparently, they were dismissed because people were so upset. There was so much public outrage because these people had helped save the lives of these immigrants that they were transporting. I think they were taken to the hospital or something. So it was a little bit different from the previous case I talked about because they were actually taking these people. But there was so much public outrage that the Fed said, okay, we'll give up and we won't charge them. We won't prosecute them. But that in itself shows you how arbitrary this whole system is, that they decide who they're going to prosecute and who they're not going to prosecute. When I first got back to Laredo after getting my law license and I started practicing law, I filed a lawsuit against all these federal officials asking for a declaration by the federal judge, I filed it in federal court, that this whole system was discriminatory and arbitrary because people with the same offenses got treated differently. Some got their charges dismissed, like this couple. Others got convicted and fined and sent to jail on this exact same offense. So that the officials could decide on a per person basis or a per offense basis who was going to go to jail and who wasn't. And I said that system cannot be constitutional. There's a principle called equal treatment under law, where everybody should be treated equally, regardless. Either the good way of dismissing all the charges or the bad way of sending everybody to jail, but it's wrong to have this arbitrary power. I forget what happened to the case. I think the judge threw it out. It certainly never went anywhere. But I got my point across. And recently, no, I'm sorry, there was another case in Arizona where a guy helped illegal immigrants in a shelter there. The group is called No More Deaths. And some illegal immigrants were suffering. They just crossed the desert or something, and he let them in. He was giving them water and food, maybe letting them sleep there for a few days. And so they charged him, the feds did, and they prosecuted him, and they went to trial. And guess what? I mean, clearly the guy was guilty, and the jury came back with a not guilty verdict because they said, there's jury nullification. The jury came back and said, we're not going to convict a guy. We're not going to let you send a guy to jail for helping out people who are on the verge of death. So it's a fantastic case. But just recently, there was a couple in Los Fresnos that were running a bakery. I mean, this happened just a few days ago. And running a bakery, and the feds come in and bust them, and they have a green card. They're Mexican citizens, but they can work here. They have the so-called, infamous green card, that you need to work. You need permission to work as part of this immigration control system. But they hired illegal immigrants, and they said, these people needed help. They needed jobs. Okay, we helped a few immigrants here. It's like a small bakery, but it was a very popular bakery. Los Fresnos is right near the border. I think it's got like 90% Mexican Americans, sort of like Laredo, my hometown, which I think is like 98% Mexican Americans. But so they just were helping people out with a job, and they're charging them, and they're going after them, and they're probably going to, after they get them convicted of hiring illegal immigrants, they're going to get them deported, even though they've been here and they have a very popular bakery in town. And my point is, when you see regular, ordinary people like the judge and the lawyers and this guy helping out immigrants over here, these are not robbers and murderers and thieves, and they're getting charged in this system. It's a good sign that this is a pretty rotten system. Recently, I also read that there were 3 businesses in Denver that got fined $8 million for hiring like I forget how many, 150 illegal immigrants or something. I mean, they're giving people jobs. This is what's called freedom of association, liberty of contract. People coming together. We want to hire you. We're willing to work for you. Illegal immigrants are they're the hardest working people in the world. That's why those companies hire these people. So they fine them $8 million because the feds love money. I mean, they're $37 trillion in debt, so they're looking for money. That's what asset forfeiture and the drug war is all about. And so here's a big ripe, plum, where the company's got millions of dollars. But nobody goes to jail, you see. They're going to try to put this couple from the bakery in jail for they're prosecuting them criminally for hiring, I don't know, 3 or 4 illegal immigrants. But these big companies that hire 150 or so, oh no, we don't want to prosecute them. They're kind of prominent. Well, just give us the cash. Give us the cash. We'll take the cash. Well, unfortunately, that bakery doesn't have $8 million to give them, or probably they'd get off too. And then, here's the best story I'll wrap up with. Not the best, but one of the best here. That Kinney County, which is right near the Texas-Mexico border, it's west of San Antonio. I don't know how many miles, a couple hundred miles or something. You can find it on a map where Bracketville, Texas is in there. But Kinney County, look at this racket. They were, when illegal immigrants would come, they'd set bail, okay? And so, a guy gives $1,000 in bail, and as soon as he pays $1,000, the officials turn him over to the feds, who immediately deport him, and they tell him he can't have his $1,000 back because he didn't show up for trial. Because he's been deported. So Kinney County has made, $1.7 million in these forfeited bonds, bail, that people have posted illegal immigrants as part of this racket of taking their money, getting them deported immediately, and then them not showing up for trial and forfeiting their bond. This is a crooked, corrupt system. It's a system, it's rotten. It's rotten to the core, just like the war on drugs is. You've got systems that are rotten to the core that are reflected by going after innocent people, innocent in the sense that they're not robbers, murderers, just regular, ordinary people that they're going after, and then reflected by the dysfunctional aspects of the whole system with ever-increasing suicide rates and drug addiction rates. And this is what we ought to be doing as a country, is looking at things in a fundamental sense of what's wrong with America, in a fundamental sense, and what do we need to do to get things back on the right track. That's what we do at the Future of Freedom Foundation. We show what we need to do to get this country back on the right track to freedom, peace, prosperity, morality, and harmony with the people of the world. I'm Jacob Hornberger, and this is Trump Watch.